It's time for another type along, and last time we were focusing on the layouts. So grid layout, border layout, flow layout, and card layout. So you did the 4 layouts type along. This one we're going to focus on the components that are going to make up this application. And so it'll have all the layouts, but again, focusing on the applications. You want to start with the code that I have on my website. It's called ManyComponents. You'll compile it and you'll run it. And we're going to modify this a little bit. So this type one is going to be a little shorter than the 4 layouts was. Not much shorter, but a little bit shorter. And again, you'll be turning in the result to my Google Classroom. So the first thing I want you to notice is that it is made up of a card layout, a primary card layout, because I've got this set up. And then if I click on it, I go to the next panel, which is behind it. And then if I click on that, it goes to the next panel, the third panel, which is behind it. And then if I click, I'm back to the top panel. So there's a top, there's a middle, and there's a bottom. Top, middle, and bottom. Okay, so let's go and look at that top panel. So we're going to work on this one first. And I want to take a look at the imports. You always want to make sure that you import everything that you're going to make use of. I know that it can be a little bit tedious, but you want to make sure that you understand what it is that you're importing. So we're going to need the layouts because we are making use of every one of those 4 layouts. And we are going to include all of these components. These are all called components. So a J button and J radio button, button group, J checkbox. These first 4 are all ways to just choose things. And then the next 4 have to do with some text areas. The scroll pane you're going to find is going to be attached to the text area, but it's going to contain some text information, whether it's a J label, a J text area, or a J text field. And then the J slider is something that you slide to get some information. And then we're also going to do some menuing, which is kind of interesting. You can get some nice compact information from a J menu bar with J menu and J menu item. You've seen all these listeners before. The ones that are a little bit different are these last 2, the change event with the change listener, and that goes with the slider. The slider is a little bit different than the others. All these others are going to be using the action listener with an action event. All right, so we've got our big frame, right? That's what we're starting with. And then in that frame, we're going to do the card layout is in it. And then in this card layout, we have the 3 cards. So the first one had the J buttons and J radio buttons. And then there were text box, text area, text field. And then last we had the slider with some menuing. Okay, so let's take a look at that first panel again. So I'm going to run it one more time or go back to the running version. And you'll notice that this first panel is split into a grid. It's got something on top and something on the bottom, so that's a grid layout. It has 2 rows and 1 column. And then in this panel on the top, it's just a flow layout. And then the second one, the one that is in the second row, is also just a flow layout. So you can see that with the code here. So you've got the grid layout. That's the first one that is on that first card. And then that is split up into 2 panels. There's a top panel, and then there's notice how we're adding to the top, and then there's a bottom panel. And the top panel is where we have that flow layout. We're flowing to the left. And we can maybe change that a little bit. If I try and center those values, notice these values are kind of they're oriented toward the left. Let's try to center them. And let's make those values, kind of tighten that up a little bit. We'll maybe say 60, 50. So we're kind of just adjusting that here. Here the I am a J label is going to wind up being on the same line because it's going to fit. And I don't want that, so I'm going to increase the size of these a little bit. And you can do that with a font. So I'm going to create a new font, and we'll just call it font my font. And I'm going to copy this here, this new font, paste it in. We're going to make it a little bit bigger so it's going to flow in. So I'm going to make this maybe 26. And then I'm going to use that my font here. And then I'm also going to use it down for the label message that says I am a J label. That my font. But then I'm also going to use it for the buttons. I'm also going to use it for the buttons. So I'm going to set the font. So I'm going to copy this here. And so for the first button, I'm going to say button1.setFont, my font, and then we'll also do the same thing to the second button. Make them a little bit bigger. So again, Control C, we'll recompile, we'll rerun, and there it's a little bit bigger. Those values are a little bit bigger. And it says and they're centered, right? You can see how they're being centered. Even when it has to flow to the next line, it's being centered. You can right justify, you can left justify, much like you can in Microsoft Word. Let's take a look at the bottom panel. So the bottom panel in this grid layout, right? It's a card that has a grid layout on it. And you're adding that bottom panel to this particular card. And it is another flow layout. And here, these are J radio buttons. And what you typically want to do with J radio buttons is you often want, from radio buttons, you want the user just to choose one of several choices. So in this case, it can be red or green or cyan, but it can't be red and green. You can't be a green and cyan. And so when we do that, we actually can group them with what's called a button group. So you'll notice that not only are we adding these particular buttons, we're adding them to the bottom panel, but we're also adding them to the button group so that they're kind of talking to one another and you can't choose more than one. So and then when we choose one of them, we're actually talking to the label message. Label message is on the panel that's up above, and we're changing it. So it won't say I am a J label. It'll have some other message, and it'll also change the color. And we're not going to change that. I just want to show you that code. So here, if I press hello, it changes the message on that label. If I press goodbye, it changes the message there. If I choose cyan, it'll change the color. Green changes the color. Red changes the color. One other thing I wanted to show you on this panel was that with labels, they're typically going to be transparent, and so they'll match whatever the background is of your panel. So if you want the label to kind of stand out, you're going to want to set the background and change the opacity. And so we'll do that here with this I am a J label, and you need to do two things. So you need to set the background and we'll say it high contrast to black, so black and white. And then you also need to make sure that you set the opacity. So you're going to say the name of your J label, which is label message, .set opaque. And by default, it's going to be transparent. So to make it opaque, you're going to say true. And now that background will show up. So you have to do these two things in conjunction with one another so that the background shows up and it is opaque. So if we recompile and rerun, now you're going to get that black background. You can say hello and goodbye, and then you can change it to cyan or green or red. So you just modify this, kind of centered these rather than a left flow layout. It's so center. We made these bigger, and then we also created a background for this J label. J labels are typically just for showing information, not responding to pushes or anything like that. And that's what we've changed there. So that's your modified first panel. Okay, let's take a look at this next panel. So another panel. This one has a border layout. The primary layout of this particular card is a border layout. And there's something up in the north. There's a north, that's the J check boxes, hungry and tired. There's something in the south. This is a J text field. And then there's also something in the center. Remember, with a border layout, the center will just kind of fill it up. And then in the north, there's another layout. It's a grid layout that has 3 columns in 1 row, or one row and 3 columns. And then in the center from the border layout, there's another grid layout. It has 2 rows and 1 column. So we'll see that reflected in the code here. We scroll down. You can see that it's primarily a border layout. That is the layout of this particular panel. It's a border layout, but then it's split up into different panels. So there's a checkbox panel that's up at the top, and it itself is going to have a grid layout. It's got 1 row and 3 columns. So it has a label that tells it what these are. These are checkboxes, and checkboxes are a lot like buttons. They respond very, very similarly. And we're going to add those to that north. It's in the north, but then we're adding them one at a time, and so those will be added one at a time in the grid layout in the north. And then we also have a panel in the middle, and in that middle, we're going to add it to the center, so that's the biggest part of our border layout. But then in the middle, we're going to have a grid layout. We're adding a grid layout that has 2 rows and 1 column. And again, let me show you that. So that in the middle, it's a grid layout that has 2 rows and 1 column. In the north, has 1 row and 3 columns. And then we've got a famous speech by Abraham Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address here, very short speech that is there. But then we are adding we're adding a text area, and it has its own messages. And the thing that's interesting here is that in the middle, we have what's called a text area, and you can match a text area with a scroll pane. And that allows you to scroll up and down. This is a nice little feature that you can add to text areas that you can attach. And you'll notice that what I'm doing is I'm adding the text area to the scroller, and then the scroller is being added to the text panel middle. And if you don't want a scroller, I could have just added this text area directly, and then it would look like this. So there's no scroll, it's just the text area, and that you can't see all the words, they don't fit, so it doesn't make as much sense to do that. So you probably are going to want the scroller there. And then to the south, that's where we have this text field, which just says this is a text field. And now it does respond if you hit the check boxes. You can respond just like you would to buttons, and it's going to change the check boxes to true or false, checked or not, and then it's going to set the text. So let me show you what happens when we run that. So it says this is a JText field, and I say hungry, and it says hungry is selected, but tired is not. If I check tired, then the other one winds up being unchecked because of what we were doing in action performed. So hungry is not selected, and tired is selected. Now, I don't like how this particular component is pushed all the way to the left. So this is a label, and with labels, if you want to put some type of border on it, you're typically going to have to use a panel behind it that has a border. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to change this. So I'm going to focus on this piece right here, and I'm going to put it on a panel. I'll put it on a panel, and then that panel, I'll put a border around it, and that way I'll be pushing in the words a little bit. So we'll create a new J panel, and we'll call it a wrapper because it's kind of a background that we're creating, and that's a new J panel. And then we're going to make that a border layout. So wrapper set layout is a new border layout. And then I'm going to steal from up above here where I've got set border where I'm creating an empty border. This is a nice way to do some padding. So I'm going to do that down here as well. So I'm copying, but it's going to be for this wrapper panel that's going to be in the back, kind of the background. We're going to layer that on top of it. So I just added these 3 lines. And then what we'll do is before we add the text panel, we're going to say wrapper dot add, and there we'll add the label text. So we're going to add the label to the wrapper, and then we'll add the wrapper to the text panel in the middle. And again, you're layering another panel behind, and you're giving it a border. So let's see what happens there. Go to the next one, and you can see how now this is indented a little bit. And the way this works is you start in the north, and then it goes east and south, and then west. And so I think I'll do 20, and then the important one's going to be here on the west side, where I'm going to want maybe a 50. I want to really push that out from the left-hand side if I can. So let's recompile that. Run it. Go to that second panel. Whoops. Let's see, north, south. It might actually go in a clockwise. Next. Okay, there we go. Now it's being pushed even further. Let's even make that let's make that 80. Really push that in. There we go. So it's almost centered there because of the padding that I've given it. All right, so I can change the information that I have down below here for my text field. This is actually editable. You typically can't do that with a label. Where I can edit here, but then once I hit tired, it's going to rewrite it again, hungry, and it is editable. This is also this 407 years ago. These are typically editable, so I just copied and I pasted in. You can actually see the scroll bar that goes, or the scroll pane that goes with the text area getting bigger and bigger. So this just has a lot of text in it, and so you could maybe add to it or subtract from it. All right, so that's the second panel. And then the third panel, what we have here is we have a nice mix of, we've got a little menu here. This can really be nice to use because it doesn't use up much space, and you can get some information from the user. And maybe I want a green circle, or I want a blue circle. And if I want to change the size, I just use the slider. Just go up or down. And again, I can change my colors to whatever I want. So let's look at the code there. So this is this last card panel. And let's look at the slider first. So the slider has lots of information where we're putting tick marks and things like that. Notice that for the slider, when you're reacting to the slider, you're going to use state changed, and you can use slider.getValue. You can look at the API and see what you have available, but that doesn't use action performed. Instead, it uses state changed, and it uses a change listener. Where did I add the change listener? That's down here. So not an action listener, it's a change listener that is being used there. All right. Let's see. For this, you will notice that it uses a border layout, and I give it some insets, so you can see those here. So you can see that, you know, this white background, the insets are there, and you can make those bigger or smaller. That's what's going on with that border layout. And then we're adding to the north, that's where the menu is. We're adding to the east, that's where the slider is. And then we've got the circle that's in the center, right? The center will fill whatever is left. Let's move the slider to the other side. So instead of having the slider Where's the slider? Okay, here's the slider that is added to the east. Let's add it to the west. And when we do that, it will behave the same way. Again, it's a card layout that reacts to mouse presses, but now the slider's over here, right? Just put it in different places. Notice that I did set this to vertical. You can set sliders to vertical or horizontal. That was one of the choices I made, but now it's in the west, and colors can be changed. All right, let's talk about the menuing. The menuing is kind of a neat feature that I really like. It would be useful for a game because it's nice and compact. But menus are a little tricky because it's in three phases. So first, you have to have a bar up at the top that you add to, in this case, I'm adding it to the north. And then you have to add the menu to the bar, so you can see where the color menu gets added to that bar that was first defined. And then the menu itself has what are called menu items, which drop down from those. So let's build another menu that's to the side of this menu so you can kind of see how this is going to be happening. So my menu bar is not just going to be for colors, it's going to be for a couple different things. So I'm going to just call this a generic menu bar, not a color bar. So I have to change that in a couple places, there, and there. So the three places where it's going to now be a generic menu bar. And now I'm going to have a color menu, but I'm also next to it, I'm going to add a shape menu. So I'm going to copy everything that has to do with a color menu. I'm copying that. And then I'm going to paste it in. I'm going to kind of separate it a little bit so I can distinguish it from the rest. But then I'm going to try and kind of follow what we did for the color menu. So this color menu, I'm going to make it into a shape menu. And it's going to be for shapes. And for the shape menu, let's just have two choices. So I'm going to just have two menu items. I'll add two listeners, and then I'm going to add them here. Okay, so it's going to be a shorter list. So we'll have a circle, and we'll have a square. Those will be our two shapes. So one of the choices will be circle, my menu, or menu item, and then we'll have square, and then we're going to add that. And we add an action listener because they're going to act a lot like buttons that we can, access and then release. All right, now instead of adding the red and green to the color menu, we have to add those menu items to our shape menu, and there'll be the circle and the square. And then we've got this menu, but it's not attached to anything yet. So we have to attach it to the menu bar. So we're going to add the shape menu to the menu bar. And so now we're going to have two things on the menu bar. We'll have the color menu, and then hopefully right next to it, you will have a shape menu. Now the shape menu won't react at all yet, but let's see if we can get it to compile for us. I'm going to clear this. Whoops, and then run it. And I'll cycle through using the mouse listener. All right, so now I've got colors that do react. And then we got shapes. So we got circle and square. Uh-oh, now something's going wrong with the colors. So it doesn't react to the square because we haven't done that. And then the color somehow went to black. So we need to fix that. But at least we have the menu showing up. So let's see how this is reacting. So it looks like we're getting a color number with the menu item values, and then we are setting a color with a color number. And it looks like there's a draw here. What is draw here? So draw here is the drawing place in the center, and it looks like there are some variables there. All right, so let's react to that. So instead of using a color number, I'm just going to call the method draw here set color. And we'll just set the colors to 1, or 2, or 3, or 4. Because those indicate red, or green, or blue, or orange. And then we're also going to react to what happens if they choose a circle or a square. So those are other menu items. So we'll add those in here. And so that will be circle or square. And we're going to set not a color, but a shape. And we'll have maybe call circle 1. And then we'll call the shape for for square 2. And then we'll repaint that center element. All right, that means we're going to need to change this drawing place. So there's going to be a color number, there's going to be a size, there's now going to be a shape number as well. Shape num, and maybe we'll set that to 1 to start out with as well. Be our default shape. And then when we paint, we're going to pick a color, but then we'll also say if the shape num is 1, then we'll draw the circle. That's what that oval is. And then we'll say else if that doesn't work, we will have a shape num of 2. So else if shape num equals 2, and in that case we'll draw the square, which will be a rect. So fill the rect. And then the last thing we have to do is we wrote a set shape method, so we got to add that in. So set shape, and that'll be int s down here. It's a little bit better, and then this will be shape num equals s. Okay, so a fair number of changes here. Let's go take a look. So what I did is I added in all of this menu stuff for the shape menu. And then I changed my action performed so that it would look like this. Reacting to those. And then I added a new shape num variable. And then I have a set shape method. I've got if and else. And let's see if that'll work for me. So recompile. Rerun. Go to that panel. All right, so I can play with the size. I can play with the colors. And now let's see if I can change to a square. I can change that size. Change the color to orange, red. I can choose a square or a circle. And go back to the square. Go back to blue. That looks good. And again, I can cycle through here, and when I get back, it's still in the same state that it was before. So those are pretty much all the components that I think you're going to need to make use of when you get to the game. And you want to make sure that you change this so it looks just like this. So first panel, second panel in the card layout, third panel, and then turn it in my Google Classroom. Thank you.